Welcome to Pub and Porch, Applied Stoicism in Modern Life, hosted by Adam Piercy and Mick Mulroy.
Okay, I think we're good. Great. All right, so we're back. This is the first video recorded episode for Pub and Porch, the Applied Stoicism podcast. I'm joined here with Mick Mulroy. Good to see you, Mick. Thank you again for coming on.
Great to be here. Hopefully, our actual faces don't scare people off of our podcast.
Yeah, the reveal has happened. Hopefully, it's a positive reveal. So we'll just jump right into it because we were chatting before we started recording today. So the big thing we were going to talk about today was something called the Stoic Opposition, which both you and I were sort of chomping at the bit with this one when you suggested it earlier this week and did our reading, but also we knew about it already. So the Stoic Opposition is it's interesting because it's a modern term for a group of Stoics that were very active in the political spectrum of Rome it sort of begins in the Republican era and near the fall of the Republic with Julius Caesar, and then extends into what I always call Imperial Rome. I think most people would call it that. And so it's an interesting period of time with a group of people who are very specifically, I think being Stoics in their active political lives. So, but Mick, you wanted to bring this on as a topic today. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about your understanding and why you wanted to bring this up today?
Sure, and I think as we both talked about before, and I think you just referenced, this is a title that modern historians, Stoics use. So they didn't call themselves this, right? They were being Stoics. That's what their opposition was based on. They didn't have like a specific group. It just was that the principles of Stoicism, of wisdom, self-discipline, justice, and courage, of course, primarily, I think, which is more than just physical courage, it's also moral courage to speak out when something's essentially not right. That was what they were doing. So it wasn't like, hey, let's get Stoic Opposition T-shirts and all that kind of stuff. So it's important to point that out. But one of the reasons I wanted to bring it up as a topic is because there is a concerning trend, and we can get into the statistics a bit later, but toward autocracy in the world today, right? Which I would argue is the antithesis of Stoicism, is an autocratic um, ruler who takes away the rights, liberties of its citizens for their own benefit, and it's happening. It's happening now, and I think if there obviously can be way more, and there needs to be way more than people who claim to be the practitioner of Stoicism as the opposition. But Stoics should I think take this on as a requirement when one has to deal with this disturbing trend toward totalitarianism.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with that sentiment. You know, the one key aspect of the cardinal virtues of Stoicism that I think resonates here is justice, right? Benevolence, magnanimity, goodwill towards all, and justice for all, not just judicial justice, but justice in terms of treatment in the day to day. You're right. That is something that I think you and I have both talked about this either with each other or on the podcast about feeling like those are being. I think if I were to summarize it, I would say we feel like those are being threatened, or those are being those key. I would consider them human rights in many ways, right? All I think they are. They are being threatened in many ways, and so as Stoics, right, we are. I don't know that I would say, and I'd be keen to know your interest on this, but I don't know that I would say that Stoics fall within one political party or within one specific political mindset. But I think the Stoics just have this general, like, it's not about what's right, it's about what's correct, right? It's like what's correct is that everybody gets justice, is that everybody is treated well, is that you are not removing the rights of people, you're not treating them ill, and that's the key thing. You and I are both kind of dancing around it, but I think it's important to say the Stoic opposition, it's a name for a small group of people, but they were not that, and you were saying this yourself, they were specifically being stoic. They were living this philosophy day by day, and in unfortunately many cases putting their lives on the line in a world where, especially imperial Rome, the autocratic rulers of that time were just untouchable, so they could do whatever they wished, right?
Yeah,
But I think
and
that's
they
a key.
bear
I
the
think that's the key thing.
consequences.
Say that again.
Yeah, they bore the consequences. It was almost a sense of pride, right? And the
Yeah,
consequences were anything from exile to essentially forced suicide, which is of course execution.
absolutely.
I mean, it is. I think as I looked up some examples of this, and many of them were senators, of course, the people that had the ability to push back politically against an autocratic Caesar, and many of them did to great uh, uh, you know consequence to themselves. And this was, and the trend still exists, right? When a ruler tries to take power away from another elected body, the Senate, and shift it to itself. When the ruler tries to use the system, whether it's the legal system or the or others, to basically enhance their own wealth, right? So public corruption for a private benefit, or when they try to manipulate, the open press. I'm an analyst for ABC News, so I'm not a journalist, but I certainly have a strong relationship to the media, and you don't have to have a strong relationship to the media to want to have a free media, not one that's gets its content dictated by the dictator, right? So these are what they dealt with back then. It's not unique till today. As soon as there was probably a political system that man invented, somebody tried to corrupt it and take all the power. But I think if you look back, obviously at Plato's Republic, when he went through discussions on, you know, um, the positives and negatives of each democratic system, and I think Zeno was clearly stating an egalitarian type concept that promoted democracy and equality amongst not just men, but men and women, which was, I mean, talk about being way ahead of your time. That is something that I think Stoicism is grounded in. So I do agree with you, Adam. I think you could be a liberal, using our definitions down here, our descriptions, liberal, a moderate, or a conservative, and clearly be a Stoic on either part of that spectrum. But I would find it hard to believe that one could be a Stoic and promote autocracy, because you need to go back to like the source documents and where it started, and probably reread the entirety of it, because that I don't think is possible. I think you've missed the boat, literally. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, yeah, and I think that last part is a really key point here, right? Because right back from the sort of progenitor of the practice, Socrates, right? Like Socrates as the progenitor, he begins his time creating like the philosophy, which I don't know that he was thinking he was creating something, he was just being something, right? In a time where, Athenian democracy is is abundantly the one big new thing in the Hellenistic world, and then or the Hellenic world, and then Sparta takes over and they get the 30 tyrants, and he's living in a world of there of essentially a plutocracy. It's ruled by the few, right? And
yes,
he's which is it's basically one step away from autocracy if one of those plutarchs becomes, or plutocrats, I guess, becomes their own thing.
yeah,
So it's right there at the beginning, right? The very famous Stoic, which usually is considered one of the first of the sort of Stoic opposition in Roman times, which is Cato the Younger, right? He's
yes,
he's fighting against Julius Caesar and famously leads troops at Utica and loses, right? And he
right,
he pays the price. Now Ryan has a great line about which is actually I think a quote from Napoleon about how Cato's death only served Cato, but at the same time, I think it just shows that, we are always going to rebel against that autocracy because we believe in this, just treatment of all. And there was one example that you didn't say, which I be keen to know if you agree with me on this. But I think in terms of that justice for all situation, when we're in a situation where you have people being divided into separate groups, or you have people being made out to be better group and lesser group, for example, of the same group, right? When you're starting to divide people like that, I also think that's something that Stoics can easily get around, the idea that, like, we're not okay with that because of this
Right.
egalitarian view that is built into the foundation of what we study and what we practice. And so I agree with you that you could be anywhere on the political spectrum, liberal, moderate. We would call that centrist, I think, in Canada a lot of the time, or sometimes
Hmm.
center left is what people would say, right the way through to conservative views. I think, um, you know, this isn't specific to any of those, but we do have those commonalities. You're right, which I think is literally that autocracy. But the thing that I think is really interesting to me, and I'd really love your take on it, is like, so Stoics don't like that, for example, but like, you know, a lot of the times, people get nervous to do something about it. And you and I aren't going to be prescribing what someone does, but ultimately, like, it's a tough challenge to come up with, like, what do you do in these circumstances, right? Obviously, in the history, the Stoic opposition, they did everything from, speak openly about their distaste for certain political sphere actions that were going on, right through to taking up arms against autocrats. Right? We know that.
Hmm.
So, I guess what I would say is, in your mind, like, what do you think is the most stoic in this kind of circumstance? Is it to keep things to yourself, or to be take some kind of stand or action, or do some kind of uh, of action to do something? And we're not going to prescribe what it is, but I mean, because I know I have a view on that, but I'd love to hear your view on that.
Well, I mean, the term that's used often in the United States is loyal opposition, and I think the concept is, um, we have a constitution, for example, and as long as your opposition is within the bounds of the Constitution, obviously not armed rebellion, for example, that's what a loyal opposition is. And until the other side goes out of the bounds, then there's a moral obligation, because that's why we have a constitution. Many countries do, to follow it. So I do think, I think the example of Cato is actually fascinating you bring up, because the first president of the United States, General George Washington, actually had his troops watch that in the field before one of the most pivotal battles of the Revolutionary War, right? Because I think he saw his struggle. Because I mean, if you follow American history, it was touch and go whether we're going to win that thing. Like, I imagine there was plenty of times when, if they were betting in Vegas on it, um, George wouldn't have been doing too well, right? So he knew that he could end up like Cato. Was my point, right? He could end up, on Bunker Hill or wherever, having lost, and potentially even making the choice of, do I uh, do the noble death, or do I, surrender? So I think it's much more, it's easy to look back at it now and say I was some just romantic version of looking at Stoicism, which I think Washington clearly was. Um, or was it an actual, like, hey guys, this is a consequence. Like, we got to win. You know what I mean? Like, we got to win. So it was probably a lot of both, right? But I do think it was also tying a moral right to what they were doing,
Yeah.
because Cato was always viewed as being more, at least in my opinion, being morally superior, an example of, like, pure stoic courage and strength and justice.
Yeah.
So I think that's an incredibly important point. Now, one of the things that you mentioned it, that I think Stoics, when it comes to justice, would promote, is the idea that everybody's should be treated the same. Right? There shouldn't be a justice system for one group of people, like wealthy, and one for the other. Right? That in the U.S. they call it due process. Like, you have a process that everybody benefits from, or doesn't benefit from if you're obviously a guilty person. Right? But it's a process. It's fair and equitable to everybody. And then whenever you start seeing that break down, like, well, okay, you people have a process because you're wealthy or what have you, but you people don't have a process because you're a day laborer in the United States that doesn't have any rights, right? Um, and I'm not getting into immigration here, but there's a process to determine whether they're even here illegally that's not being done before they decide that they need to be. So there's a need to have due process for everybody, and I think that's part of what justice is under the way the Stoics view it. And I think we're seeing that not just in the U.S. Not to make this show about the U.S.
No,
I'm
but
just using examples. Yeah.
I think you're right, though. We're seeing this in a much wider sense, right? And in some ways, it's interesting because when you when you parallel Rome with so many other things, right? And there was a meme thing going on recently about how often do grown men think about Rome. Apparently, you and I think about it a lot more than most people, right? But I think it's important to note that there are a lot of parallels between that and now, and it's not so much to say that it was better back then. That's not nobody's saying that, or that we're worse off. It's more to say that this is cyclical, and we should be able to learn from these things, right? Like Rome had a constitution, right? Rome had a republic with a constitution and elected leaders and everything like that, and they went into this autocratic world with Julius Caesar. That's when Cato and uh, Pomp, Pompey and stuff like that come up because they're fighting against that. So we see that again today, right? In fact, Caesar was sort of doing a two-tier system thing at the time in the politics. I'm not going to get too into it because my history's I haven't studied that part up, but I think it is absolutely normal for us to want to step in and say, I don't think this is right. A Stoic, at the very least, I think, would say that. They would come in and say, this does not feel correct. This doesn't feel like we're doing the right thing here, right? I mean, the simple one, and this is not specific to anything, because there's so much of this again nowadays across various parts of the world. It's like the targeting of women and children and absolute civilians, right? I think everybody would say that's not okay, right? The targeting of specific subgroups of a culture or population for reasons that are absolutely, not right, that's not okay. You know what I mean? And I think every Stoic at least will take a stance on that. Every Stoic at least would take a stance and at least say something in some manner on that. But I think as well, just to take a step away from the super political stuff as well, Stoics are also an action oriented group, right? Like when we talk about justice, it's not justice for me, it's justice for everyone. And the treatment of others is a key part of that. So, I think like Marcus Aurelius talks about it in the Meditations, where he sort of says, well, today you will meet tough people, etc. And he's trying to tell himself, just be nice to them, like just it's okay, right? So I think if we could take one thing away from Stoicism in general, I think it's that it's not an introverted thing. There is definitely an outward, like action oriented part to the philosophy, which is this idea of justice. Justice is not just for yourself; it's for others. Um, and that's where I think we come into this discussion of, people want probably someone may want us to make a statement about what should we do? Should we go to a protest? I don't know. I don't, it's totally up to anybody what their actions are, but definitely Stoics are not the silent in the corner watching everything happen doing nothing people. The history has shown that that is not the case, right?
But you can't be an introvert and be Stoic.
You
Right.
can be an
So,
introvert. Yes, you can. That's the other thing. You can be,
yeah.
but this is where I think
But
it's
you're right.
even.
I get your point, though. Your point
Yeah,
is it isn't just about sitting in the corner going, thinking in your head how screwed this stuff
yeah,
is, and not
yeah.
doing anything about it. 100% get your point
Yeah,
there.
we're not. I can't remember who would be like that. I think it would have been the Peripatetics who were just like their whole like I think it might have been the Peripatetics or the Eclectics or something. But it was like if it's raining, you just go, well, it's raining, right? As opposed
Right.
to a Stoic would find an umbrella, and that's okay. You know what I mean? Like they might find an umbrella for somebody else too, right? And I think
Right.
and that's not to get too into philosophy history, but it's just like I think you're right about that. But even for those, if people are doing this and they are introverted, you have to remember that Stoicism and its actions they can be tiny, right? They can be the tiniest thing of, this is something I forgot to mention before we got into the podcast, but I love your take on it. It's just, there are civic duties, I think, that come with being a Stoic as well, right? Like, um, I have volunteered in the past to do on Christmas Day. My father and I would do. We worked at a local community center and did Christmas dinners for those in
Yeah,
need, right?
sure.
And I think that's part of the Stoic opposition. It's like I hate to be talking about the super media of today, but like there's a new Superman movie out there, and the sort of joke line coming out is like maybe being nice to people is the new punk rock. And I'm like, yeah, that I'm kind of with that. I was a punk
Yeah,
rocker in high school, and I
yeah.
think that's something that I would say to a lot of people. And I really love your take on this idea of just the general civic duty as well, because I think it's a civic duty to stand up against tyranny and oppression and anarchy and autocracy. But I also think it starts with the smaller things, even just the kindness of walking an old lady across the street. I hate to use such a cliche term, but I think it's a real thing to think about. So what do you think about that?
Well, first of all, I definitely think that like I mentioned, you can be an introvert and be a stoic, but sitting on your hands is not, you know, the idea of stoicism. You know, every man's guilty of what they did not do, right? Um, I, I think you have an absolute obligation. Now, sometimes that's speaking up, voting against, for example, if you're a senator, like Helvidius is one of the ones I read about the senators for this in preparation for this. But you see that in modern times, right? You see senators that are you going to go along knowing that they don't agree with it, right? I'm just using the political types right now, knowing that they don't agree with it, or they said something completely different for their entire career, and now they've changed their view because they're being told to, and they're concerned about their political future. I think there's one standing up for the principles of equality and human rights and individual liberties, but it's also standing up for your core convictions. Like if you don't have any convictions, I don't even understand why you run for office, right? If your convictions are stay in office at all cost, um, that's the last person that should be elected to to a political leadership position. So even if I disagree, so my point there is even if I disagree with their principles, which is totally acceptable, I'm sure some people disagree with mine. I have more respect for people who stick with them, right? If for example, and I'm a big supporter of the U.S. supporting Ukraine, for example, but if somebody was for 6 years and now all of a sudden decided it's a terrible idea, then I'm throwing the bullshit flag. I'm throwing the you're more concerned about staying in office than you are for core principles of sticking up for democracy against an attack by an autocracy that's 10 times its size, right? So not to get all fired up there, Adam, but these are so it's both, right? It's both sticking up for basic human rights and the ideals of democratic society, but it's also sticking to your own. If there truly are your moral convictions and you can change them, then I would argue they're not your moral convictions. You have no moral convictions. So it is also being consistent. And not only, and you already brought it up, but you don't just demand freedom for yourself. You demand freedom for the person that's standing next to you, right and left, even if that person is saying something that's not in agreement with you, right? The right to free speech isn't just to protect the speech that you agree with. It's to protect the speech of everybody, whether you agree with it or not.
Absolutely. I was raised uh, by um, the mindset that anybody should be able to say whatever they think. I should also be allowed to say that they're wrong, right? That's okay too. But
Yes.
I was definitely raised in a place where we could talk about stuff, and that I think is a really important part of what we're talking about here. Like, yes, we were talking about this a little bit, right? Like, um, Socrates was a decorated war veteran. He had fought
Yes.
numerous
Sergeant
campaigns,
Major,
right?
basically.
Yeah, and so that's one end of the spectrum, but this other end of the spectrum is just the action of talking about it and being open about these things, right? Like I believe it's Rousseau. I think I said this in an earlier podcast, right? Like there's a quote which is I may not like a thing that you say, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it. And I firmly
Yes.
believe that that is a real part of being in the world that we are in. And Stoicism, if we go way back to what you and I started this about, which is just having the conversation, I think has this as a core value is just the openness of communication and talking about stuff. Pub and porch, is becoming something that I think embodies this key aspect of Stoicism, which is that it took place on the streets. It was a talk to your neighbor, talk to the guy next to you, get the different viewpoint philosophy when it started, before it was even probably called Stoicism, right? It was already built into that. And we should be able to talk about these things and whatnot. Now, I think you and I would both agree, though, that doesn't mean that whatever everybody says is right. Some of it is very wrong. Let's be frank. I think we have to both be
Sure.
frank that Stoics would be okay with saying it's wrong, but a
Yes.
true Stoic would be open to finding out that they are wrong and then looking introspectively to say what is the right answer here, right? You talked about values there, and we talked about this on an earlier podcast. I believe Stoicism is one of those things that's a choice. And, I made a choice to do a little exercise. I was about 5 years ago to find out what my core values are. And I have three words that sum up my values, which are wisdom, courage, integrity, right? And I think that's the key thing. Wisdom is also not I'm smarter than anybody else. Wisdom is the application of knowledge and experience, together, and I think that's a key part of what we're talking about. You don't have to take up arms against something. I think a lot of people jump into that boat right now, and I'm just like, wait a second, like I'm a pacifist. I just don't understand how militant stuff can get right now, or how polarized it can get. But at the same time, you can still do smaller things that I think get where we're trying to get to, and starting this dialogue, even if it's just, like a conversation like you and I have, I think is putting us in a much better spot than not talking about it or being so polarized to say, well, I'm not talking to you about it and I don't want to discuss it. So I think there's so much more that people can do there. But you're right. I think you have to be okay with some kind of value. But our wisdom tenet is going to be one where you have to. Those values are great. You can change your mind, but don't change it willy nilly. It should come from a place of rational thinking and whatnot. So, but I get people sometimes where they say to me, they're just like, I don't know what to do. And we're not going to prescribe what to do, but I so many people, they're like, it just seems to be going so wrong nowadays, is what one of my friends in the UK says. A good friend of mine in the UK said that. He's like, they've just not understood, is something that he says. And you're like, yeah, I know. And they're sort of like, I just don't get it. I don't what so, and then they say something like, well, I just don't do anything. I don't get involved. And then it comes down to, like, they sort of say, well, I don't vote, or I don't get involved in that dialogue. And it's like, well, okay, but the people who care about it, they are involved in that dialogue. And if you're not, then your voice is not doing much. And I do think we would say, you're right, you can be an introvert and be a stoic, but there is some action oriented side to it, which I'm getting repetitive, but ultimately I think that's an important one, because it is a choice if you're choosing to take no action. But it can be
Agreed.
small town action of picking up garbage at the local park. Um,
Mhm.
it could be a big action. Maybe somebody runs for office. Maybe there's a Stoic
Yes.
opposition we'll see calling themselves that in politics somewhere today. Who knows?
I would be happy to and support it fully. Quite frankly, we need more people that follow the principles of Stoicism in politics. I can understand how people don't want to do it. It's really
Yeah,
getting nasty. Maybe it always has been, but if
yeah,
if the people who uh, believe in these principles don't participate, and I'm not talking myself into participating, I can tell you that. But I would support other people that do, and I would support other Stoics that would. I would point out, and I don't know Anne Applebaum, I think I met her before, but one of the books that I recommend reading, it's called Autocracy Incorporated. It's fairly new, and it talks about the trend around the world. So it's not just participating in your own democracy at home. It's remembering that democracies are not in the majority. People, about 72% of the world's population, live in under some form of autocracy. There's about 91 countries. It's a significant trend uh, toward autocracy in the last 20 years. And there's around 45 trending countries toward autocracies. Now, obviously, some of them are very large, which is why the population is 72% falling under that. But it is something that I think not enough people who live in a democracy realize, because they tend to focus inward, especially here in my country, where everything's like a political infight inside of our democratic system. Um, but they don't really see how lucky we are to where we live. But also, in this used to be a difference. There's a trend politically toward, we're just not going to really worry about supporting democracies around the world. It's all about trade and economics, and it's not about promoting the principles of democracy, which is one man, one person, one vote, uh, right to free speech, the right to association, the right to practice your religion or not practice any religion. Um, all those things shouldn't be taken for granted for because people around the world don't live with them. And if we don't, as democracies, promote that concept, then I don't think we really believe in the concept. So I'm not saying that's what we do. I'm not saying we I was against the war in Iraq, not Afghanistan, but against the war in Iraq, this concept that we were going to go there, force democratic change. That's not the way to do it. But certainly promote it and certainly stand up for and defend countries that are Ukraine. Um, that those are, I think, also the principles of democracies, not just enjoying them and arguing about them internally. It's also an
Yeah.
external thing. So, like you said, it's not an inner thing; it's an outer thing. Because if it's just an inner thing, you're not really doing much to help the situation. I'm taking that into the country level. That the
Yes.
countries have an obligation is what
Yeah.
I'm getting. Yeah.
Yeah, and um, I think there's something about action here that also leads to the discussion about, this is probably something that could be its own topic, is about being an example, right? When I went to an American high school internationally when I was in my teens in the UK. And one of the things I remember learning about was that um, the founding of the USA was definitely something around. They were trying to build not a utopia, but they were definitely trying to build a model society based on this, right? And they were using the classical world as a model, right? The
Sure.
writing of the Constitution, the writing of the Bill of Rights, things like that. Like those were not new concepts to the United States, but the way they were being applied was a little bit new. But there was always this idea that it could sort of be this beacon. I think I remember hearing at the beginning and trying to be like that. And I'm not saying that I'm not going to push any country to be a beacon. I think every country knows more for itself what the best thing to do is. But I do think it's important to think about the actions that we do. Again, going back to the action oriented, is being setting an example, right? Like I have definitely seen in my world. Like I work in the space program, it can be a very tense environment sometimes. I have seen in my world where you get that one quiet person, right, who just calms the moment. They bring the moment down like 10 notches, right, on the volume, and they set that example. And that's a very small world example, but I think in the big world, as you're talking about, I think you can, what we do as citizens of our countries, as citizens of the world, right, we can set an example that can embolden others to be a certain way, right? That's a key thing that I think. I don't know that we've really talked about this yet, but I do believe in this. I don't walk around thinking I'm an example. I don't walk around thinking I'm a model. Every Stoic grapples with the fact that we'll never be a sage, but there's definitely that aspect of doing the actions, doing the things. I think in democracies it is important to vote. I usually my political views are generally what I would call Roman. I don't care what you do, who you do, where you do it. Just don't harm anyone, don't break the law, and vote is sort of my
Very
viewpoint.
libertarian.
I appreciate that, but at the same time, I also believe that what we do in those actions is something that can embolden others and be an example, right? I think you've told this story about like in a theater one time. I don't remember who said this, but in a theater one time, an old man walks in and no
Yes.
one moves for him, or he smells funny. I can't remember, and then
Yep.
a very prominent Stoic gives his seat up, and it's sort of like, well, at least that person will do what's right. It doesn't matter what it is, and I think
That's right.
those are the examples. And we have big exemplars over history that we pull from, right? Socrates, Zeno, Cato, Epictetus, Marcus. These are all great exemplars. And when we do actions like that, no matter how small, I do think it sets an example. And I do use that small world example, excuse me, of someone with magnanimity towards a tough coworker or a tough opposition in a debate in a meeting room somewhere. That example where you can have the right magnanimity come in, where it brings the noise down to an acceptable level again, I do think that can apply in some ways to the wider world when you have the reasoned country, the reasoned exemplar of a nation that's built under good discourse and good justice for all, and right justice for all is something that I think works. So anyways, that was a bit of a long-winded thing to get there, but ultimately I think it's really important to think about that. We I don't believe I am being watched by everybody all the time. We talked one time about the choice we make, and you said it's about what you do when no one's watching, right? That's the
Mhm.
example that you set for others, and I think that's in some way how to think about this. If you stand up for that thing and you stand behind it, regardless of whether you're on, the squawk box, as I used to call television, um, or not, I think that says a lot about someone, and it shows others they can be that way. They can stand up for good. They can stand up for reason. And I think that's something to keep in mind as we do this. But I will never forget. I will never give up on the idea, though, that it is the little things. You know,
Absolutely.
my girlfriend, my partner, lives in a neighborhood where literally there are like 6 houses in the neighborhood, and I can see them all from where I'm sitting, basically, and they care for each other in a way that you don't see everywhere. And this
Right.
is and they just do it. And I know that that's a contagious feeling that kind of emanates out from this area. And when my family met some of these people at a recent barbecue, they were like, "Wow, these people are great." And it was like, yeah,
Hmm.
and they don't go out there being like, "I am going to be a good person." They sort of just do the thing. And I think
Hmm.
that's what we're talking about is you can do these small actions. They can be infinitesimally small to you, but they might change the world for somebody else. But no matter what, we are talking about a philosophy and a mindset that is action oriented.
Yeah. And one of the things that even though I was not really, nobody asked me, but for the war in Iraq, that struck me, a lot of good did come out of it, right? So there was a very oppressed group called the Kurds in the north, who, in my view, are much more inclined to democracy than other groups around them. But one of the things that I remember distinctly when I was in the north and we came down from the north toward Baghdad, we finally met an individual who had worked with us, basically risking his life and a lot of his men's life to um, make the path to Baghdad easier for us. So I was talking to him, and he brought his father in, who had lived under oppression for essentially most of his life. Brutal oppression, lost many relatives and friends to Saddam's regime. But when we brought him in, he was talking to the interpreter, obviously talking to us, and he was whispering, like really whispering, like you wouldn't want somebody to hear you standing like 5 feet away. And finally, his son said something loudly, and the father started crying. And I looked at the interpreter. I said, "What he said? What did he say?" He said, "Dad, you don't have to whisper anymore." Right. So it was, to me, it was that realization that, oh my God. So this is what it's like to live under tyranny, right? Where you literally start crying because you realize you don't have to whisper anymore. So that always stuck with me and always will. But I do believe it shows the resilience. It shows action, like you just talked about. This family was supportive of the fall of the dictator Saddam Hussein, um, and it showed that even politically, what have you, decision to invade is another one. But the goodness of standing up for those that are oppressed is a virtue, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think especially for those out there who are curious that haven't done a deep dive, I'm sure we're going to have listeners in some of these episodes that where we're their first time ever hearing about this talked about. You know, if you're sitting there thinking, I feel like I should do something here. I feel like something's not right, you know, then that is stoicism. And I think Mick and I would both at least be able to say we would both suggest that you take a look at what I'll say into, because I call it a practice, and I don't know, I don't remember if you have a name for it, but ultimately, I think that's the one thing we would say if someone says, "Well, I want to stand up for what I believe in, and I want to, treat people well, and I want to, use wisdom to make good decisions, and I want to, be in control of my emotions, but not be a robot. You and I would both say, well, that's stoicism, right? And
Mhm.
most of those are ones where they're treating people well. Treating is a, it's a verb to treat, so it's an action. And I think that's the key thing. So if someone's interested in it, if they hear something that we're talking about today and it resonates with them, well, that's stoicism. We're not a splinter group. I had sort of said this before, and I think we can sum that up. We're not a splinter group by wanting to talk about these things. In fact,
Yeah.
we're the norm of standing up for
Yeah.
these things that we believe in, and
I
that's
think,
why so many of us resonate. Go ahead.
yeah, I think, I mean, I understand. I think you should just call yourself a Stoic if that's the philosophy you follow. I understand the idea that that might sound um, like you're trying to promote yourself as an ideal, which is arrogant. So maybe we can all be aspiring Stoics. I don't know what you want to call yourself, but I'm in the constant pursuit of that. And I think whether you're going from a 2 to a 4 or a 7 to a 9,
Yeah.
progress is what counts. I'd also point out a quote, just as I like to use quotes, and I think people
Yeah. Yeah.
do. He who chooses to be silent when he ought to protest is making himself the accomplice of tyranny. That's Seneca the Younger. So it's silence isn't enough. That's, I think, one of the key themes of today. Silence isn't enough. You need to be active. You need to
Yeah.
promote what you believe in, or you're only halfway there.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good place for us to wrap up for today. I really enjoyed this conversation. I think, I think this is a good time for you and I to say, so for our listeners, if you have an opinion on this, or maybe there's a way that you do small things to, be action oriented in your practice, I think we'd love to hear about that. So, feel free to drop a note in wherever we tell you to write a note. I don't know where we're going to do that right now, but
We'll have a Gmail.
in the
Yeah.
outro where you can put something like that, I think, right? So,
Yes, that's the idea.
yeah,
We want engagement. We want
we do.
feedback. We want people. I mean, if anybody in the audience would like to write like an essay
Yeah.
on this, we can hang it. We can hang it attached to the podcast. It doesn't matter, if we agree or not. That's not what we're looking
Hmm.
for. And eventually we'll start having folks on
Yeah.
that really seem to have dug deep into the topics. I
Yeah,
think that's
for
where we got
sure.
to go. This is like you said, pub and porch, man. This is the everyman's podcast on stoicism. That's our intent
Yeah,
here, and we
absolutely.
like pubs because
Yeah, and we like pubs and porches.
who doesn't?
So,
Yeah.
all right, well, let's wrap it up there. But Mick, thank you again for the chat, and for those of you listening, we hope to see you on the next episode soon. So, thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Pub and Porch podcast. If you'd like to find out more about the podcast or its host, head over to pubandporch.com, and you can listen to all our episodes on Spotify, Apple, or whichever platform you prefer. And if you'd like to help out with the podcast, you can find us on Patreon. Drop us an email if you have a comment on any past episode, you have a suggestion for future episodes, or you have an essay on an important topic for Stoicism. Send it to us, and then we can be reached at info@pubandporch.com. Today's music was provided by bensound.com. Until next time, Pub and Porch out.